Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
what I've heard today is a council debate that I believe will be one for the ages.
City Council votes to create an elected oversight board for Chicago police, what that entails and why some alder people opposed it.
Plus, what that elected board will mean for the city's agency charged with investigating police misconduct. The interim chief of Copa shares her thoughts.
This panel has lost all legitimacy.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejects 2 Republican committee members named to investigate the January 6th insurrection. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in.
Colleges are preparing for the start of another school year amidst the pandemic. Here are the reopening plans for 3 area universities.
COVID cases are rising, but Lollapalooza is still happening. What an infectious disease doctor and music critic think about the festival.
And after years of renting, a group of street vendors are now owners of a shared kitchen. But first, some of today's top stories. Illinois could be receiving nearly $800 million to put toward opioid treatment and prevention if a historic $26 billion settlement is approved. Attorney General Kwame Raoul's office says the settlement is the result of a lawsuit from Illinois and other states against several drug manufacturers and distributors, including Johnson & Johnson, not the maker of this drug you see here. The state and local governments accused Johnson & Johnson and 3 other major pharma distributors of engaging in deceptive and unfair conduct and continuing to ship opioids to pharmacies that submitted suspicious drug orders. The Illinois Department of Public Health says opioid overdose deaths increased by 36% in the first 3 quarters of 2020 compared to the year before. Many Chicago public schools are choosing to cut the number of student resource officers, or SROs, in their school buildings. This summer, 7 more schools have opted to remove SROs from their campuses entirely, with 24 choosing to keep just 1. 20 schools voted to keep both officers. Now, this compares to last year when 55 local school councils voted to keep the program and 17 voted to remove them. The push to remove police officers from public schools grew strength last summer in the wake of George Floyd's murder. Advocates say in the last 2 summers, the number of cops in schools has decreased by almost half. This year, CPS advised schools to adopt a whole school safety plan, which considers safety options as alternatives to school resource officers. And now to Paris for details into today's contentious debate over civilian police oversight at City Council. Paris.
Brandis, that 2-hour debate at City Hall resulted in a 36-13 vote in favor of an elected board of residents to oversee the Chicago Police Department. Mayor Lori Lightfoot applauded today's actions.
What I've heard today is a council debate that I believe will be one for the ages. That you have weighed in and represented your constituents well, and you've represented the city of Chicago well.
WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, this at first glance looks like a signature accomplishment and piece of legislation in the Lightfoot administration. Remind us what's in this ordinance.
Well, this board will have the authority to set policy for the Chicago Police Department, but the key compromise that set up today's vote was allowing the mayor a veto. In addition, the board will be allowed to hire the head of the police misconduct agency that investigates wrongdoing, alleged wrongdoing by officers, and they'll be able to take a no confidence vote in the superintendent as well as police board members. Originally, some proposals would have given the board the power to hire and fire. That was also part of the compromise reached today.
And there was a lot of emotional debate on the City Council floor. Let's hear from the head of the Black Caucus, Alderman Jason Irvin.
We have to think about it in a global sense, because this is not just about your box. This is not just about your community.
Heather, what's he getting at there?
Well, of the 13 dissenting votes, 10 were cast by white aldermen, and a majority of those aldermen represent wards which have high representation of police officers who live in their wards and which are also among the safest and have very little, if any, violent crime. He was pleading with his colleagues to unite around this proposal to restore, rebuild, or even instill trust in the Chicago Police Department, which has faced trouble trust issues in the African American and Latino communities going back decades.
And one of those aldermen from the Northwest side you speak of is Alderman Nick Sposato. Let's hear what he had to say.
We don't need police reform. We need family reform. Families need to start taking ownership and watching after their children. So we don't need to defund the police. We just need to keep putting oversight on the police and make police not wanting this job, afraid to do their job. You're going to win, I'm going to lose, the police are going to lose, and the city's going to lose.
And Sposato and 12 other alder people voted no to this ordinance. Did they have the same argument that Mr. Sposato had there?
Well, some of them did, and a lot of them were worried that this panel will add another layer of bureaucracy to what the police department is supposed to be concentrating on in fighting crime. Alderman Anthony Napolitano, who represents the neighboring 41st Ward to the 38th Ward, said that he feared that this would cause crime to triple. Addressing reporters after the city council meeting, Mayor Lori Lightfoot said she hoped that was hyperbole, but would not happen. It's really two competing visions of what the police department needs to do to stop crime. Some aldermen who voted no today think that officers just need to be freed up to fight crime and with harsher sentences by the courts. Other aldermen see that this crime is driven by a lack of trust and a lack of respect between the community and the police department, which are very, very different approaches to the same problem.
What impact do supporters of this ordinance hope that it has on crime, on things like police reform?
Well, they hope that it will put an end to this, like the settlement that was approved today for the family of Pierre Lowry, who was a teenager who was killed back in 2016 by an officer after a brief foot chase. And if that makes you think of the deaths of Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez earlier this year, you should. The circumstances were very similar. And the hope is that this elected board will put an end to those sort of situations and prevent multi-million-dollar settlements from being on the city council agenda nearly every month.
It's a very complicated piece of legislation, a lot to look into. We're going to unpack it a little more in Spotlight Politics. But before we let you go, Heather, another ordinance passed that will completely renovate the site of the old Michael Reese Hospital. Tell us about that.
That's right. Well, back in 2009, former Mayor Richard Daley saw this defunct hospital site as a place to build the Olympic Village for the 2016 Olympics. Of course, Chicago did not get the 2016 Olympics, and it has been vacant since then. But now it is poised to be redeveloped with $4 billion of investments. It is set to become 4,800 homes, as well as offices, health facilities, a museum, some open space, and it will really transform what's south of McCormick Place along the lakefront and create a whole new neighborhood that Alderman Sophia King said should be now known as Bronzeville Lakefront.
All right, Bronzeville Lakefront. And by the way, we're going to be out there tomorrow with more on this massive development and other happenings around Bronzeville. But for now, we leave it there. Heather, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. As we just heard, City Council voted today to create a board of civilians to oversee the Chicago Police Department, the Police Board, and the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. That last agency, known as Copa, was created in the wake of the Laquan McDonald murder to investigate police-involved shootings. Recently, Mayor Lightfoot complained about how the agency has operated. She claims it takes too long to render some decisions. And joining us to discuss civilian oversight and more is Andrea Kirsten, the interim chief administrator of the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. Andrea Kirsten, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, first to that big vote today, the new Police Oversight Council, 7 commissioners that will have oversight over, among other things, Copa. Did City Council and the mayor get this right?
You know, as a civilian-led organization ourselves, we're obviously deeply committed to civilian and community input in our police accountability structure. So certainly we look forward to the implementation of this additional piece of that oversight. So sort of a promise delivered after many years of discussion about how this would look and work. And we trust that our elected officials, community advocates, and activists have spent the time and put in the work to put together the right ordinance for our city in this moment.
And you no doubt have heard some of Mayor Lightfoot's frustrations with Copa and the former administrator saying that it takes too long sometimes to come to a resolution, citing the Anjanette Young case. She says it took 18 months. Do you agree with that assessment from the mayor?
You know, when this agency came into existence, it inherited a reputation for a lack of timeliness, but also a lack of integrity, a lack of transparency, and absolutely little to no trust in the community that it serves. And so now here, over 4 years in, I think Copa has really done the lion's share of work to establish a level of investigative integrity, to earn the trust of the community that we're serving, to be the kind of transparent agency that our city demands. And if the critique that's left is timeliness, well, we agree with that. We need to continue to improve our efficiencies to be able to deliver closure and resolution to all of these cases, Anjanette Young and any other case that comes in our door. But timeliness, with respect to our investigations is clearly a critical component, but there's a lot of other timely aspects of the work we do, such as our transparency releases and making sure that we're explaining to the public and providing information that they are able to have when there's a high-profile officer-involved shooting or other kind of incident that people want answers to. So, we work very hard to meet all of our timeliness expectations and benchmarks at this agency, and we acknowledge that work is ongoing, and we look forward to that.
Over the years, resources have been an issue. I mean, has City Council and the mayor allocated enough money and resources to the agency to be able to investigate all the cases that come to your doorstep?
Resources, staffing, all these things certainly contribute to the success of an agency. But what I think we really are focused on right now at Copa is just continuity. We are a relatively young agency. And so being here poised to be selecting our fourth chief administrator, we are really seeking to capitalize on the traction that we've been able to gain, particularly in the last 2 years. And so that is probably the most key component to our success, is just continuing to move on this trajectory of progress that we have been on. And we will need the resources to do that appropriately.
And there are many high-profile cases that you investigate, most recently the shooting deaths of Adam Toledo and Anthony Alvarez. In the Alvarez case, Copa did find fault with the police officer and suggested stripping that officer of his powers. Can you give me a sense of the threshold that had to be met to find that ruling?
Sure, and those standards are set forth both in our guidelines as well as the department's, but certainly factors such as whether an individual officer is a danger to the community or the behavior would be likely to be repeated, et cetera. So we really have to take those things into account before making such a serious recommendation. And to do that at the beginning stages of an investigation doesn't happen all of the time. So certainly we take that responsibility very seriously in making those kinds of recommendations.
And in part of the process here, Copa makes its recommendation. If it does find fault with a police officer, the superintendent of police can disagree, and then they go to the police board. So tell me about sort of the adjudication of this. Is it the most effective way to adjudicate?
I would say it's a system that's rooted in due process principles. And so, there are what can at times seem like a lot of steps to this process, but ultimately it affords both sides an opportunity to make sure the issues are fully vetted and resolved. We also have to work within the confines of the collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. And I think Copa does an excellent job, as do the other, players in this system, at really trying to be as effective at moving cases to completion as quickly as possible.
And it's not just police-involved shootings, but the office is looking at Fourth Amendment cases. It's looking at sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. What about that area of the police department? How big a problem is that you've been looking into?
Sure. So, historically, domestic violence in particular, officer-perpetrated domestic violence allegations are something that has been under Copa's jurisdiction throughout its inception and even prior to that. The addition of sexual misconduct allegations is something that came about as a result of the consent decree, and we're working to finalize that in our ordinance as well. And I would say, I'm glad you asked, because this is an area of our work that I have particular I'm particularly prideful of. We have spent a lot of time developing in-house resources, skill, and ability to tackle those cases from a trauma-informed perspective with the level of expertise that is required of those delicate issues. And to do that, we have to work collaboratively, not just here at Copa, but with our partners, because there's often criminal allegations associated with many of those. So with the Bureau of Internal Affairs at CPD, with the State's Attorney's Office, we've actually spearheaded a working group to make sure that all three of those agencies can kind of coalesce around these issues to lessen harm and trauma to impacted parties, but also be able to conduct our parallel investigations in the most expeditious and transparent manner.
Certainly an important issue. Lastly, for you, we mentioned your interim, the former Chief Administrator Sidney Roberts left. The mayor gets to appoint a new director until this commission gets set in place, and then the commission will appoint it. Is this a job you want full-time? Would you like the mayor to appoint you?
Absolutely. I'd like the selection process to, determine the right person for this job, but I wouldn't have agreed to be the interim chief administrator if I didn't intend to try my best to lead this agency at this time. As I said, the years I've spent here at Copa and kind of everything along my career path leading up to here, both as an advocate for domestic violence, a Cook County ASA, a prosecutor, an administrative law judge, all of these steps along the way, I think really uniquely prepared me for this moment and for this opportunity. And it would be a privilege to have the chance to be the next chief administrator of Copa.
All right. Our thanks to Andrea Curson. I know a lot of work in that office. It's very busy. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And now to Brandis for what to expect on college campuses this fall. Brandis.
Paris colleges and universities are preparing for the start of another school year amidst COVID-19. And while vaccination rates are on the rise, what exactly will the fall semester look like on campuses? Joining us to discuss reopening plans and more are Arthi Dupelia, Vice President of Undergraduate Education and Dean of the Undergraduate College at National Louis University, Timothy Killeen, President of the University of Illinois System, and Z. Scott, President of Chicago State University. Welcome back, all of you, to Chicago tonight. Arthi Dupelia, let's start with you, please. How has National Louis University been preparing to reopen this upcoming school year?
Thank you for having us. So we've, of course, been putting all the safety protocols in place that you need for this fall in terms of masking guidelines, cleaning protocols, self-screening protocols for students when they come to campus. And we've also been looking at our vaccination protocols. And at this time, we are strongly encouraging, but not requiring vaccination among students and employees. But when we surveyed students and employees in the spring, approximately 75% of students and 90% of employees said they already were or plan to get vaccinated. And we're optimistic that this number will continue to rise as the fall term approaches. So we're looking forward to seeing that number continue to rise.
And on that note, President Killeen, the University of Illinois System today announced that you are requiring staff and students to be vaccinated at the start of the fall semester. How did you all arrive at that decision?
Well, we've been intensively preparing for this all along, all the way back to the beginning, with our epidemiologists, medical experts. We've been doing the vaccine clinical trials, and we developed a whole set of plans for saliva testing, et cetera. Very successful year we've had with no U-turns and no severe illnesses. But we do feel now that vaccination is the key to getting out of the pandemic as our whole community, and to make our campuses as safe as possible. We're going beyond encouraging. We're requiring vaccination so that we can get beyond the numbers that Artie pointed out. Our surveys also show that the majority of our faculty, staff, and students are already vaccinated, but just getting those extra percent is going to be very important, particularly with the variants emerging. So everything's backed with all the protocols that were very successful last year. We're very excited. Our enrollment is robust. It's probably going to be another banner year of growth. And these young people need and want to socialize and be in settings where they can get access to world-class educational settings. And so that's our focus, as always, student-centered.
Now, the Illinois Board of Higher Education said that even before the pandemic hit, that enrollment for Black students in the state's colleges and universities had been dropping from 2013 to 2018. President Scott, what divides do you believe already existed that were made worse by the pandemic?
Well, first of all, thank you for that question, and thank you for having me here tonight. I want to tell you, since you first heard that 29% drop, it's gotten worse. It's grown another 5%. So since 2013 to 2019, there was a 34% drop in Black student enrollment in our Illinois colleges, which we view as a crisis. And the crisis is now on top of a pandemic, which created another significant crisis in the Black community, as we continue to see that the pandemic has wreaked havoc on our Black and brown communities. So I'll tell you this, what we're doing in terms of, unlike the surveys that were conducted by my peers here this afternoon, our survey of our students showed that 20% of our students expected to be vaccinated, and another 10% were thinking about it. So just like what we're seeing nationally, there's a significant vax hesitancy in our Black communities that we are working to manage and help our communities manage. Chicago State was a mass vaccination site for the city of Chicago. That was one of our strategies for encouraging vaccination. And we continue to employ other strategies, including requiring that our students who are in our dormitory, our single dormitory on our campus, and our student athletes are required to become vaccinated. Like National Louis, we're still continuing to look at the issues on mandatory vaccinations, particularly when it comes to populations of in our community who are concerned about various aspects of the vaccination and are continuing to show a great deal of hesitancy.
And President Scott, you mentioned that it was already a crisis before the pandemic hit, that enrollment decline. What's being done to reverse that dip in enrollment?
So we are working diligently. We have, started with, first of all, by having a pre-college program for our incoming freshmen that is free. It includes a significant supports for our students. It's called our RISE Academy, for RISE Scholars. It's a 5-week program that really tries to get students engaged in college without the pressure of worrying about finances and money and how I would pay for this. Because as our communities have gone through significant hardships from the pandemic, including job loss, our students have told us the most significant thing that they are worried about is money. How will I pay for that? And with our freshman program, we've taken that off the table. We've also looked to giving more financial resources to our students through emergency grants because of the CARES Act and stimulus funding. We've also offered our students laptops, internet access, mental health counseling, free tutoring.
So obviously, a lot to sort of reduce those barriers that are keeping them from attending school.
Yeah.
Vice President Dupelia, have you seen the pandemic disproportionately impact the students at your university?
So we have seen it, but I will say that our enrollment actually held pretty steady over the past year, and we think it's because of the affordability that we offer, because all the wraparound supports that President Scott spoke to, we also offer, and all the career preparation that we embed across the experience, because we know students are looking to go to college for those jobs and seeing that opportunity at the end of their college experience. But at the same time, while we've been able to sustain enrollment, 70% of our students are low income, 70% of our students are Black and Latinx. So our students are coming from the communities that are most heavily impacted by the virus. So we have seen that impact firsthand. 40% of our students are essential workers. Over 40% said they had a family member diagnosed with COVID. Over 30% said they experienced a negative economic impact because of job loss or reduced hours. So that meant we had to wrap around our students to keep them thriving, not only in college, but also life with, for example, over $3 million in emergency funds for living expenses and scholarships to help keep our students going.
And of course, the pandemic has meant a lot of trauma and anxiety for everyone, students especially. And we hear from U of I student Mariama Mwalambwe on what mental health support students need. Here she is.
Students need to feel like they're supported by the university. They need to feel like there are culturally appropriate counselors available. They need to feel like there is an abundance of appointments for them. They need to feel, as though that they're not just academically and financially supported by the university, but also mentally and emotionally, that they feel that their concerns are being heard.
And President Killeen, what is the U of I system doing differently this year to address some of those mental health concerns?
Well, Mariama is exactly right, and I was actually with her today. You know, the mental health issue is significant and serious, and it's been a grueling year for all, right? But particularly young people of different persuasions, and it's been disproportionately impacted the people of color as well. So we have held a high-level summit on mental health for students, and we're putting in place new training modules. We've got new websites that we're building up, and we've got an advisory structure and a task force that's really focusing on this issue of looking after the mental health of the students. And in just one sentence, I think what we're doing is we're going from a system of, you know, referring individuals for professional help to one that wrap around the whole community coming together so that we're all looking after one another like in a kind of a bigger village way. And that has resonated with our student body, including Mariama, who's right on target. This is a challenge for us. And I also want to say, congratulate my colleagues here on what they're really doing to work hard on the issue of making sure that all of our young people can afford access to college and that we don't leave people behind in any way. And we're there too with all of that. We're fortunate that our enrollments have grown, and even for the underrepresented minority community, and we're fully 1/3 now of our undergraduate body. But mental health is a high priority for us this year.
And before I let you go, we've got about 30 seconds left. Vice President Dupelia, what challenges are you expecting at the start of the year? And do you see the Delta variant being an issue?
Yeah, I think it's too early for us to comment on the Delta variant. I think, like everyone, we just continue to follow the federal, state, and local guidance and continue to evolve as we learn more. And I'm confident we can continue to evolve our safety protocols and offer safe and high-quality education. My greatest concern, though, is that students from the high school classes of 2020 and 2021 don't become a lost generation in our economy because they never got the educational opportunities they deserve. So we're working hard to not let that happen by continuing to recruit throughout the summer and offer the supports that students need.
Plenty of work for all of you. Thanks to the three of you for joining us, Z. Scott, Arthi Dupelia, and Timothy Killeen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, should the music go on? A local music critic and an infectious disease doctor share their thoughts about rising COVID cases ahead of Lollapalooza.
Public safety is the issue.
Our Spotlight Politics team takes a closer look at the City Council's historic civilian oversight of the Chicago Police Department. And a group of street vendors are using their experiences to become investors in their own kitchen. We share their story. But first, some more of today's top stories. A massive redevelopment of the old Michael Reese Hospital site gets the City Council green light. The proposal involves about $90 million in city taxpayer funds to clean up the site and build out new roads and infrastructure. In all, the plan calls for 4,800 new homes, offices, research facilities, and stores as part of a $4 billion redevelopment. The developer is a consortium called GRIT, led by Chicago-based Fairpoint Development, and we'll have more on that tomorrow from Bronzeville. Illinois Congressman Rodney Davis will not serve on the House Select Commission to investigate January 6 after all. Today, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pulled all of his picks off of the commission. This after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi rejected McCarthy's choices of Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan and Indiana Congressman Jim Banks. Republican Liz Cheney of Wyoming, who Pelosi selected, remains on the panel. The U.S. Senate stalls on a vote to begin debate on the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure package. A vote to invoke cloture and proceed with debate failed by a 49-51 margin. Republican supporters of the bill have said they want more time to finalize the language before the package moves forward. Illinois Senator Dick Durbin today called the move unfortunate, but says he's still hopeful the process can eventually move forward. Despite rising COVID cases, the show is going on. The Lollapalooza Music Festival, which routinely attracts more than 100,000 people per day, kicks off next week. The festival in Grant Park is happening at full capacity, while the more transmissible Delta variant is causing a rise in COVID cases right here, with Chicago's daily average now at 100 cases per day and the positivity rate at 1.6%. And joining us now with more are Jim DeRogatis, co-host of Sound Opinions on the radio, and Dr. Emily Landon, Executive Medical Director for Infection Prevention and Control at UChicago Medicine. We did invite Lollapalooza organizers to join this conversation, but they said they didn't have anyone available this evening. But we do welcome both of you back here to Chicago tonight. First with you, Jim DeRogatis, and I think I know the answer to this. Lollapalooza going forward with 100,000 people per day, good idea?
I think it's insane, Paris. There was a concert that drew 20,000 people, an electronic dance music concert in the Netherlands in late July. And they were strident about making sure every attendee was vaccinated. So out of 20,000 vaccinated people, there were 5,000 infections. 1,000 infections, 5%, which makes sense. The vaccine is 95% effective, but only 95, 1,000 people. If we extrapolate that number to 100,000 in Chicago, that's 5,000 infections. We're going to shut the city down again for this greedy corporate festival?
Dr. Emily Landon, could that happen here, given the way Jim is extrapolating what happened in the Netherlands? Could Lollapalooza become somewhat of a super spreader event?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. There's no reason to believe that there are not going to be infections that happen at Lollapalooza. Anyone going to Lollapalooza should absolutely expect that they're going to be exposed to COVID at Lollapalooza. This isn't a kind of place where you have assigned seating and where people can keep their distance. It happens in my neighborhood, and I watch it every year. It is literally a crush of humanity all in one place, and you can have a ton of contact with a lot of different people. I know it's outside, but I know they're requiring vaccination or a recent negative test, but that's not enough to really prevent spread from happening. However,
that,
I have to...
Go ahead, Doctor. I was going to say, given that, do you still think it should go on then?
I think it's a terrible idea, but it's going to happen, and there's very little that we can do about it. And so I think we have to remember that a lot of these are young people that hope, I'll say this, individuals who are immunocompromised, those who are unvaccinated and trying to avoid getting COVID, and people who live with or have close contact with people that are high risk for a bad outcome should stay home. They should rethink that ticket. You shouldn't go. It's probably too high of a risk. But, if young people feel like this is the only thing that's getting them through their time and they want to go, you kind of have to accept the fact that you're going to be exposed. You're probably going to be exposed to COVID. And the most important thing is to remember that after, you should treat the event like it's an exposure. And afterwards, if you feel sick, you need to isolate from other people and get tested. Just make sure you're following the appropriate precautions.
A lot to think about when heading out there to see the Foo Fighters or Journey or some of those other bands. Jim DeRogatis, one of the things that Dr. Arwady told me a few months ago when this announcement was made was Lollapalooza was going to have some kind of electronic online way of ensuring folks were vaccinated. They weren't going to check vaccination status at the gate. To your knowledge, is there any way that they're going to be able to check the test or the vaccination status of the revelers?
No, there is no app that is part of their app that is taking vaccination card downloads. This has been a bad neighbor for the entire time it's been in Grant Park. The fences come down and hundreds of people get into Lollapalooza every year. There have been stage crushes like when Rage Against the Machine played. This year, the supremely moronic testosterone crazed Limp Bizkit is a headliner. There's a documentary that begins airing on Friday on HBO. I saw a screener as a review about Woodstock 99, and the rioting and the sexual assaults at Woodstock 99 began when Limp Bizkit played. They can't control their own gates. Why are we supposed to believe that they are going to be diligent about checking for vaccination? It's absurd, Paris. And, Dr. Emily is a music fan. She happens to favor the CSO and musical theater. I've interviewed her to learn a lot about COVID. The crush of 20, 30,000 people in a field eager to get nearest as possible to the stage is very different from people seeing Wilco at Millennium Park. And this is not a socially distanced or aware crowd. And then they're going to leave, and they're going to go to the bars, and they're going to go to the hotels, and they're going to go to the Starbucks. And if the rain kicks them out, as we've had with thunderstorms twice in the last 5 years, they're going to shelter wherever they can. It is not going to stay confined to those 100,000 people in Grant Park. I don't understand how Dr. Arwady had allowed Mayor Lightfoot to go ahead with this.
Tell me what you really think about Limp Bizkit there, Jim. Dr. Landon, what about the fact that people might be coming in from out of state? If you look at hot spots in Missouri, in Arkansas, is that a risk here?
Yeah, I think it's important for people that live here and sort of operate in the Chicago landscape to understand that there are people coming from places where it's not common for unvaccinated people to wear masks, where people don't keep their distance. And there's no way to keep your distance at Lollapalooza. I'll remind people that there are routinely trampling injuries that happen at Lollapalooza, heat stroke related injuries. Lollapalooza is a little bit, it's way too much for me. But it is, this is now we have the added risk of this infection, and people are going to be bringing it. Missouri is a huge hotspot right now. There are a lot of parts of the country where people don't want to wear masks. They don't want to get vaccinated. They don't want to follow the rules of making sure you get tested. So you really should know that before you embark upon this. And you should understand that even though you may feel like you have sort of, I know I have sort of a much bigger distance, like sort of personal space that I expect people to keep nowadays. That's not going to happen at Lollapalooza. And so if you are expecting this to be somewhat like other events that you've attended during the pandemic, it's not going to work out that way. You should really rethink that ticket.
And like I said, Jim, I mean, we were promised that there would be some kind of online QR code, vaccination checking passport type of thing. It's not going to happen. What Lollapalooza does say on their website about COVID is that there must be vaccination or show proof of a negative COVID-19 test taken within 72 hours of attendance. If unvaccinated, wear a mask on site. If unvaccinated or at a high risk for severe COVID-19, avoid crowded areas of the festival and stay at least 6 feet away from other groups. Are these effective protocols here for people to follow?
And look, Paris, Lollapalooza lies. You and me, and we've talked about Lollapalooza for years on the show, and every time we've invited the corporate owners, Live Nation and C3 Presents, to come on the show, they've never been available once. What I'm concerned about, why is the rock critic upset about this rock show happening? What I'm concerned about is just now the infrastructure that is here 365 days a year, our 46 great music venues in every genre from jazz to rock to hip hop are struggling to reopen. They have not gotten the money yet that was approved 4 months ago in the Save Our Stages Act in Congress. They're lucky to be alive after 18 months of darkness. And if they have to close again because of this corporate ridiculousness in the middle of Grant Park, this sweetheart deal that was structured by Daley with his nephew as the lobbyist and Mayor Emanuel, whose brother sits on the board of directors of Lollapalooza, I do not understand what Mayor Lightfoot is thinking.
And we should note there are other festivals that are going to happen later this summer, fall, Pitchfork, Riot Fest. Dr. Landon, we've seen positivity rates triple here in Chicago over the last week, 1.6% now, still relatively low, but going in the wrong direction. How bad could this current wave get?
Well, the good news is that the vast majority of people who attend Lollapalooza are younger and healthier, and therefore, when they roll the dice with COVID, they're less likely to end up in the hospital or to die of COVID. Now, I'll remind everyone that dying of COVID is just one thing that can happen. Having long COVID or organ damage that comes back to bite you 10, 20 years down the line are not things that I would wish on any of these people. But, this is the United States, and we have apparently taken the approach that if you want to protect yourself, you protect yourself. And if you want to do stupid things, you can do stupid things. And that seems to be the plan with respect to Lollapalooza. Now, I hope that many of these people are going to, once they leave Lollapalooza, it's really important. You remember that it is you probably have been exposed. If you develop any symptoms, you need to stay home. If we can try and keep that contained, that's going to be the best bet. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but I think, we could see a lot of infections from this. The good news is that in Chicago, we do have really very high vaccination rates compared to other parts of the country. And most of our highest risk population, especially older individuals, are highly vaccinated. And so that should help sort of is flatten the curve, so to speak, with respect to hospitalizations and deaths. But it's certainly not going to protect us from a big increase in cases, and some people will get very sick.
A lot of things for concert goers to keep in mind should they choose to go mosh with their fellow concert goers to a Limp Bizkit show. And our thanks to Jim DeRogatis and to Dr. Emily Landon. Thank you so much.
You bet, Barry. Paris, it's all about the nookie, says Limp Bizkit.
I didn't listen to Limp Bizkit in my high school years, so I don't even know what that's referring to, but thanks, Jim. Great to see all of you as well. And up next, our Spotlight Politics team tackles a busy day in City Council and much more, so please stay with us.
We're not mincing words in that segment. We'll come back to it later, parents. City Council members approve a historic agreement on police oversight as Congress is moving further apart. All that and more, the focus of our Spotlight Politics. Joining us now, Heather Sharon and Paris Schutz. Welcome back, everybody. So a lot to get to. As we heard earlier, a compromise on police oversight passed City Council. Take a look at part of Mayor Lightfoot's impassioned push for votes.
But if people don't feel safe in their homes, if our babies can't be in their beds without the worry of a bullet coming through the window or the wall, nothing else matters.
Now, Heather, you broke down the votes for us a little bit earlier, but remind us what that was, and was this sort of a strange coalition of the ayes?
So it was 36-13, and they needed 34 votes. So this was a razor-thin margin, and 10 of those 13 votes were from white aldermen who represent areas of the city where a lot of police officers live, but also it won the support of people like Alderman Raymond Lopez, who usually votes against police misconduct settlements. And he said that he voted for it because he wants those police misconduct settlements to end. And this is seen as the best attempt to sort of build trust in the police department among Black and Latino Chicagoans after truly decades of being at odds.
And also, where did Alderman Burke come down on this?
He voted again. He voted. You know what? That's a good question. I will have to check that. You surprised me.
Surprise!
He voted no. I remember hearing him vote, and I'm pretty sure he voted no, and Ray Lopez voted yes.
Okay, thank you, Paris. So here's Alderman Nick Sposato. He voted against the ordinance, listed the oversight that he says already exists. Here he is.
We already have 11 oversights that I see, and I'm going to read them off to you. AG, body cameras, consent decree, Copa, DOJ, FBI, IAD, IG, Illinois Torture Board, Police Board, State's Attorney, supervisors, and if you want to talk about community involvement, we can include DAC and CAPS. All right? So we're talking about, no, we don't want to defund the police, but that's in essence what we're doing here.
Heather, is he right? Is this, as the Fraternal Order of Police President John Catanzara says, is it redundant?
Well, it really depends on what you mean by oversight. So all of those agencies that we heard Alderman Sposato list off have some role in holding officers accused of misconduct accountable. What none of those agencies do is set policy for the police department. And that's really what will be at the center of this new panel's job. They will also be able to take a no confidence vote in the police superintendent and have a say in who should lead the Copa, the civilian office in charge of investigating police misconduct. So it's a little bit apples and oranges, but that was the main argument of opponents against this proposal, that there's already enough oversight, nobody needs any bureaucracy, and officers who are already sort of feeling the pressure don't need to feel like they're under any closer scrutiny as they try to get a handle on a various surge of violent crime centered on the south and west sides. And yes, Alderman Burke voted no. I checked the tape.
Okay, nice work. So Paris, the mayor, we know she campaigned on civilian oversight, but this does not change the mayor's control over the hiring and firing of the police superintendent. Tell us more.
Well, I mean, this, as I said earlier, this is a signature legislative achievement for the mayor, and this comes as we were wondering about whether she was losing control over city council and things devolving and people bickering with each other. And then all of a sudden, over the weekend, a lot of alder people get together and this compromise gets hashed out that makes community groups happy and keeps the ultimate authority here with the mayor, because the commission can recommend to fire the superintendent and the mayor can say, no, I don't agree with that. And she can also veto policy. And then the city council comes in and has a role here too. And I mean, it's really interesting because this is a debate that's been going on for 4 years, and there were various camps and community groups that it seemed like no one was ever going to agree on what to do here. And all of a sudden, it seemed like out of nowhere, they come up with this compromise. So, I mean, the mayor showing some legislative effectiveness here in getting those 36 votes to approve this big initiative.
So a new report details how the Chicago Police Department was unprepared to handle the protests, the unrest, the violence, and the looting after last summer after George Floyd's murder. Now, this is not the first report to detail the department's failures. The city's outgoing watchdog released a report in February. Chicago Police Department did their own. This 464-page report from the CPD Federal Monitor Maggie Hickey tops the pile, of course. Heather, does this one have more teeth because of her position overseeing the federal consent decree?
Yes. So the Inspector General of the city, Joseph Ferguson, is purely advisory, right? But Maggie Hickey is somebody who would go to the federal judge and say, look, here's what the police department did wrong, and they aren't correcting this. And her report was really scathing because all along the mayor said, look, nobody expected these kind of protests. Nobody expected this kind of unrest. Well, Maggie Hickey said, sure, but even if you had advanced knowledge of these protests, the police department was completely unprepared to handle them because of significant and systematic failures to prepare for those sort of events. And I think that is really at the heart of what the police department is going to have to address when it goes back in front of that judge, as it will periodically for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so let's move on to some state politics. We know that Governor J.B. Pritzker, he is announcing his bid for a second term. Take a look at his interview with Paris yesterday.
We've been getting our fiscal house in order, and we've been making government work for Illinois families. And so when I think about running for re-election, that's why I'm running for re-election. It's because we have so much more that we can do.
Heather, is anybody surprised by this after he moved more than $30 million into his campaign account months ago?
They shouldn't be, even though, of course, he declined to say several weeks ago when we had him on the show that he was definitely running for re-election, and then everybody got sort of worked up that maybe he wasn't going to. But it's clear that the governor sees that he has a lot more work to do, and he only had about, half a term before the pandemic hit and really reordered all of his priorities. So there's no doubt that his response to the pandemic will be at the center of the campaign, but he's also sort of trying to look forward and say, look, here's what else we need to get done. Here's what we needed to do before the pandemic, which of course has already really laid all of those problems out there for all of us to see.
Paris, remind us who some of the potential rivals are.
Well, on the Republican side right now, you've got State Senator Darren Bailey from downstate Louisville, who's been a chief critic. He's taken Pritzker to court over some of the shutdown mandates. You've got Gary Rabin, a suburban Chicago businessman, and Paul Schimpf, a former Republican Illinois state senator. But, I find it really interesting that Governor Pritzker yesterday didn't want to talk about COVID. He kept wanting to talk about things like free college tuition for Illinoisans earning the median income or less, expanded child care. And this echoes the things that President Biden is saying and national Democrats are saying. And what I take away from that is this is a coordinated sort of message here for 2022, the midterms, that Democrats believe that this is the kind of message that will get their voters out when, midterm election is always difficult for the party that currently holds the White House. The opposition party usually is more motivated to get out, and this is going to be a very closely watched midterm. So Governor Pritzker laying out things like free college education. We're talking about, a state that is $200 billion in the hole in terms of pension obligations. I thought that was pretty interesting, but I presume that that's going to be sort of the get out the vote messaging strategy from Democrats.
And Paris, remind us how much because we know he's a billionaire, remind us how much he spent on his campaign the first time around and how much he's, possibly willing to spend this time.
Well, I think it was like 171 billion, million the first time. What's the difference? 171 million the first time, and I think the total spending came out to about $250 million, was like the most expensive governor's race in history, save for a race in California. Now, remember, he was taking on another billionaire or multi-hundred millionaire, Bruce Rauner, so the stakes were high. They were both spending a lot of money here. I don't know that you're going to see that kind of spending here if these remain the only three candidates on the Republican side. But then if you see a very wealthy self-funder like a Ken Griffin, and I have no reason to believe Ken Griffin, the state's richest man, is going to enter this race, then you might see the crazy amount of spending that we saw 4 years ago.
All right, and a quick, look at Capitol Hill. Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to replace Representatives Jim Jordan and Jim Banks on the January 6th committee. Full-blown war erupting over this investigatory committee. Take a look.
This investigation must go forward. The idea that anybody would be playing politics with an attack on the United States Capitol is despicable and is disgraceful.
Unless Speaker Pelosi reverses course and seats all 5 Republicans, we will not participate.
Now, Paris Representative Rodney Davis, a downstate congressman, was also chosen for that panel. Could he just serve alongside Liz Cheney and ignore Minority Leader McCarthy?
No, I doubt it. I mean, I think Representative Davis is a loyal Republican. The Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, yanked all the members in response to this very surprise move from House Speaker Pelosi. So I don't think he's gonna buck his minority leader and choose to serve. There is some talk about perhaps Pelosi putting Adam Kinzinger on that panel, who's been as critical of the insurrectionists and President Trump as Liz Cheney. So we don't know what's going to happen, but it is important for that panel to have a bipartisan sheen so that folks trust what they come up with, because it's very important that they do get to the bottom of everything that caused that, all the failures that happened. So however that happens, lawmakers should really put a priority on that.
All right. Busy day in politics. My thanks to Spotlight Politics team, Heather Sharon and Paris Schutz, of course. Up next, meet a group of street vendors who are now owners of their own shared kitchen on the west side. But first, a look at the weather. A group of food vendors are now officially the owners of a kitchen after having rented it for years. Under city regulations, street vendors are not allowed to prepare food at home and risk heavy fines if they're caught without a license. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez shares what owning a kitchen means for this group of vendors.
Every afternoon, Juan Jose Gama Garcia heads to work. He sells everything from tamales to corn, fruit, and Mexican candy. He has been a street vendor for 23 years.
Yo pienso que los vendedores ambulantes durante estos años nos hemos educado. Nos hemos, como dice un compañero aquí, que tenemos que reeducarnos, ¿verdad? Entonces, pues tratamos de llevar nuestras cosas limpias, ordenadas.
Gama Garcia is one of hundreds of vendors in Chicago who's had to adapt to changing city regulations over the years. Rules require vendors to have a license and also ban them from preparing food at home.
Sí, siempre hay zonas o barrios donde es más difícil, donde es más complicado, donde hay más inspectores que en otros lados. Algunos no tienen tantos problemas, otros tenemos un poquito más.
To follow city rules, Garcia and several others started renting a kitchen on 16th Street in South Lawndale. 6 years later, they can officially call this kitchen their own.
Nosotros creímos en el proyecto y fue difícil, pero lo logramos y aquí estamos. Bien, orgulloso de mis compañeros y de mí.
Gama Garcia is one of many members of the Street Vendors Association who've branched out and worked to bring the cooperative workers' shared kitchen to life.
Está bien porque somos como unos pequeños empresarios que vamos empezando de abajo para arriba y a ver qué nos toca más al rato.
For Luis Melendez, a tamale vendor, the kitchen is a sign of change for his future.
Para mí mi visión es de que aquí tengo mi oportunidad para mi vejez.
Their visions for their shared kitchen continues to grow. They're hoping to buy this lot to expand their commercial kitchen and get the community even more involved.
We got the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund to be able to fix and renovate the space here, and we would like to also expand because we have other programs we would like to offer the community and to integrate both communities together, the people of North Lawndale as entrepreneurs, and also be able to offer educational training with nutrition.
Ownership of the kitchen expands opportunities to offer other vendors assistance with licensing, law enforcement, investments, and retirement.
Depende de lo que quieras hacer. Hay varios precios. Esta mesa cuesta tanto, una parrilla cuesta tanto, una parrilla de esas por igual. Pero yo les he dicho a varios que es mejor ser socio y no estar rentando.
With years of hard work and sacrifice, they say the new business venture will open doors for vendors to chase the American dream.
Y sí, ser parte, si nuestras experiencias, si la cocina inspira a otros a tener también algo así, pues es una bendición, ¿no?
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And for more information on how you can get involved, you can head over to our website. And that's our show for this Wednesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A major redevelopment effort and a new owner for a safety net hospital. We will be taking our In Your Neighborhood series to Bronzeville.
Plus, art, history, and dance lessons with the Lipizzan Stallions in a new performance. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm named on the 2021 expertise list of the best personal injury attorneys in Chicago.